You know, one of the greatest dangers in moments of technological transition is that institutions continue to speak the language of an older world long after reality itself has changed. And we all know that reality, has indeed changed. The battlefield is autonomous, it's software-driven, it's data-defined, and is increasingly computational. Decision circles are compressing. Technology companies, our friends in the panel know that very well, are moving into the battlefield speedier than any government could ever do. Drones costing thousands can actually destroy systems costing millions. But what Ukraine demonstrated is that at the same time, some of the oldest realities of war have returned. And I mean heavy manufacturing, I mean industrial capacity, geography, energy, political will, attrition, stockpiles. So the question is what emerges? But I believe that what emerges is not a total replacement of conventional warfare by technological warfare, but instead a new synthesis, essentially. And what I meant to say is that those who will have the strategic advantage in the future, or maybe now, are those who understand what integration means. And Minister, you'll allow me to divert from protocol because we've been known each other and start from your namesake.
Feel free.
Who flew in from Seattle, and the reason is because Palantir was maybe the first company that understood what integration means. I mean, so do you believe that what I just described will be the defining model of military power?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Data integrations are super important. You're absolutely right that Palantir kind of saw that very early on in the process, mainly working through the governments. And we've been going after it pretty hard, and we'll be seeing a lot of value into it. And we also see that same value with our commercial clients as well, which is very interesting to see the exact same playbook that started from the government also being very powerful and very driving a lot of ROI in the commercial space. So I think we're moving increasingly into a world of autonomy and AI. We already know that. It's already playing out in front of us. And it's going to expand into a few ways, I think. One, I think our colleagues here from Hellenic and definitely from Anduril are doing a lot of things in the autonomy space from a hardware standpoint, right? And they can talk a lot more to it. But you're going to see a lot more going into the swarms on how we actually self-organize this type of hardware to do both defensive operations as well as offensive operations. On our end, what we're actually focusing on is how we enable real-time decision-making. I think that's going to be a differentiator in the future. Whoever can get access to the information to begin with, can process it right away, and can make sense of it right away in real time, will have a huge advantage. And I think this is where the AI race comes in. And I think this part, I want to break it down a bit because it's a bit more complicated. Many people hear real-time decision-making and think it's a straightforward thing. It's not. The devil is in the details, right? And to me, real-time decision-making has a few layers that we need to attack. The first and very important one, a very basic one, is what you just mentioned, data integration. We've been working with the government, the US government, for a very, very long time. And what we see is that gathering all the sensitive data that the commanders need access to make an informed decision is a nightmare. Because the government is siloed, there is hundreds of different teams generating different data, sometimes overlapping, sometimes non-overlapping. They go into their own systems, they go to different security levels, and where we're in the battle space and we need to make life or death decisions, we need all of this stuff into the commander's availability. So one of the first things that we're focusing a lot that drives most of the value is that data integration. How do we bring all those data sources in a single pane of glass that the commanders can actually see and make sense of it? But that's just step one. Now, there's a second step which many people do not understand. The volume of information that is generated in the battle space is enormous. There's no human being, there's no military that can consume all of that information, even today, right? And let me put things in perspective so we understand what we're talking about. Do you know how many satellites are out there that are being used for surveillance, right? A lot of them. We're talking about 30 to 40,000 satellites.
Wow.
And we have plans by 2030 to to be about 100,000 satellites. Picture that, 100,000 satellites flying in space right now, right? Now, when we go to war, we need to actually be able to monitor the Earth as real time as possible. So if you can have 100,000 satellites generating an image, let's say, every 10 seconds, you get 100,000 images every 10 seconds, which is 600,000 images an hour. Now, those images are not like your social media Facebook posts that you're actually going to see out there, right, or Instagram or TikTok. These are about 1 billion pixels each that cover a 100 square kilometer area. And over there, you have huge area, and you might have about 10 pixels that represents a surface-to-air missile launcher that you need to actually detect. Now, a trained geospatial analyst that needs to actually figure that stuff out, it will take him about an hour to go through an image, an hour. And he's been trained for 3 years to do that. If I choose any of you to do that job, it will take you about 3 days, and you will fail miserably most probably at it, because you just don't know where to look at and how to look at things, right? But the magnitude of information that comes out of this single sensor modality is just enormous. There is no military that can process all this information today, and will 10x that information we generate from that single sensor modality in the next 10 years. Now, add to that signal intelligence, which generates a lot of information. Human intelligence, add open source intelligence, right? We don't have the capacity as humans. We don't have the workforce to ingest that. And this is where AI comes in, right? How do we process all those images automatically, find out a set of candidate targets, interesting things on the ground, and then reduce the amount of information a human needs to actually go over by 98, 99% of the time, right? That's where I see a lot of the value of AI coming in, is narrowing down the volume of information that goes to the commander, but making sure that the important pieces go to the commander. I think that's very important. Now, the other thing is that even if we can get all that information, we can run AI through that information, and we can extract the information we need from the ground, we have another problem. And it was already mentioned in a lot of the other panels, which is munition is always very limited. You never, ever have enough munition to cover all of your targets, right? So now the problem becomes, if I have a system that gives me continuously feeding new targets every minute, every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes, how do I optimize? How do I use my munition against this target list? That's a very hard optimization problem that no one can just look at a screen and solve on his own, right? That's where AI can come in and improve that real-time decision-making moment. And I think that's going to be crucial to it. How do we cut down the time from getting all the data together to processing it, to separating the signal from the noise, and making that signal available to the commander's availability in a very easy and fast way so they can actually make those decisions. I think that's what the battlespace of the future will look like. We have already started building that. There is a lot more things to build in both the hardware and software space, but it's going to be an interesting ride.
So, thank you, Dimitri. Minister, I think that the fundamental conclusion of what Dimitris just described is that AI is becoming infrastructure for sovereignty. And that raises a question of power. And my question is that, for decades, governments have been using AI as a tool, some years, decades, sorry, for a tool, for efficiency, for improving digital public services. But now the question is essentially different. And how you think states should think in light of exactly what Dimitris said?
First of all, thank you for calling me, and I'd like to apologize that I will switch to Greek, so please use your earphones. Δημήτρης είπε, νομίζω, πλέον τελείως αυτονόητα πράγματα, διότι το πεδίο των μαχών έχει αλλάξει. Αν προσπαθήσουμε να προσεγγίσουμε πλέον αυτή τη νέα υβριδική εποχή με όρους παρελθόντος, είμαστε χαμένοι, είναι ξεκάθαρο. Οπότε, γι' αυτό και βλέπετε ότι και η Ελλάδα και η Ευρώπη προσπαθούν πλέον να δούνε τελείως διαφορετικά τις προκλήσεις που υπάρχουν. Στο κομμάτι των δορυφόρων, καταρχάς, ήδη ως κυβέρνηση έχουμε την χαρά να χρησιμοποιούμε δικές μας πληροφορίες. Ο όγκος είναι τεράστιος, όντως. Ήδη 17 πρώτοι ελληνικοί δορυφόροι είναι στο διάστημα. Μικρός αριθμός σε σχέση με το σύνολο των υπολείπων, αλλά όντως έχουμε πλέον πρόσβαση στην πληροφορία. Το δεύτερο είναι το πλέον ποια είναι αυτή η πληροφορία, πού πηγαίνει αυτή η πληροφορία, ποιοι έχουν πρόσβαση και πώς τη χρησιμοποιούν. Εδώ λοιπόν μπαίνει επιτακτικά το θέμα του data classification, δηλαδή ποια είναι αυτά τα δεδομένα, πού τα έχουμε, θεωρώντας ότι το να έχουμε σερβερ σε υπόγεια υπουργείων είναι μια ασφαλής υποδομή, σε καμία περίπτωση. Γι' αυτό και αναπτύσσουμε πλέον εδώ και αρκετά χρόνια υβριδικές εγκαταστάσεις και on-prem και σε cloud, public και private cloud. Και το πιο σημαντικό για μένα είναι κάτι το οποίο πρέπει να προστατεύσουμε περισσότερο και είναι οι ίδιες επικοινωνίες. Η Ελλάδα βρίσκεται σε ένα σταυροδρόμι 3 υπήρων. Από το Αιγαίο διέρχονται πάρα πολλά τηλεπικοινωνιακά καλώδια. Είδαμε στο παρελθόν ότι υπήρξαν εξαιρετικές κρίσεις με καλώδια τα οποία κόπηκαν. Η πρωτοβουλία που ευρωπαϊκά έχει αναλυφθεί από Ελλάδα και Ιταλία είναι να δημιουργήσουμε τέτοια ασφαλή hubs για την προστασία των καλωδίων, αλλά το ίδιο κρίσιμο είναι να διασφαλίσουμε ασφαλείς δορυφορικές επικοινωνίες. Υπάρχουν διάφορες τεχνολογίες, ενεργητικές και παθητικές κεραίες δορυφόρους μας. Το μέλλον νομίζω πως είναι ούτως ή άλλως οι οπτικές επικοινωνίες ανάμεσα στο έδαφος και τους δορυφόρους, αλλά και σε τζίο και λίο επικοινωνίες οπτικές. Ούτως ή άλλως το παιχνίδι πλέον με τους κβατικούς υπολογιστές και τα κβατικά encrypted κλειδιά θα παιχτεί στο διάστημα. Συνεπώς, πρέπει και ως Ελλάδα και ως Ευρώπη να είμαστε ακόμα περισσότερο προστατευμένοι. Γίνεται δουλειά σε αυτό. Αλλά αυτό το οποίο δεν πρέπει να παραβλέπουμε είναι το γεγονός ότι όσο και αν δημιουργούμε δικά μας μοντέλα, όσο και αν η Ευρώπη προσπαθεί να φτιάξει δικές της cloud υπηρεσίες, ο ελέφαντας στο δωμάτιο είναι πως δεν υπάρχει καμία ανεξαρτησία σε σχέση με το hardware. Που αυτό θα πρέπει κοινά και ευρωπαϊκά να μας απασχολήσει και βέβαια το θέμα της καταλογοποίησης, του να γνωρίζουμε ποιοι είναι οι έμπιστοι βέντορες, με ποιους μπορούμε να δουλέψουμε και ποιους όχι, που είναι τώρα αντικείμενο τους ή άλλως και του τελευταίου act για το cyber security στην Ευρώπη. Πάρα πολλές προκλήσεις, τελείως διαφορετικό το παιχνίδι. Είναι εντυπωσιακό το πόσο γρήγορα αλλάζουν πλέον τα δεδομένα. Δεν θα κάναμε τέτοια κουβέντα πριν από 2 χρόνια.
Ευχαριστούμε, Υπουργέ. Thank you, Minister. Since we went from Seattle to Greece, I'm going to go to Berlin and talk a bit with Ben. I mean, your intention, and I mean Helsinki's intention, is to restore Europe's strategic agency through technology. But what actually does Europe's technological sovereignty means now that AI is becoming, as I guess all agree, a geopolitical aspect?
Thanks, Basil. Well, let me just first quickly say how good it is to be here, and congratulations to you and to Themis and the team. It's always the hardest to do the first iteration of events, so really well done for having the courage to put this forward. We need more of these discussions. And it was those kind of discussions that led to the founding of Helsing, which is now Europe's leading defense technology company, in 2021, with the vision, very clear geopolitical vision, to use AI to protect democracies in an increasingly hostile and geo-competitive world. We know that the challenges to democracies have only grown since then, but I'm thankful to say that Helsing has grown too, and we're now more than 1,000 people working across Europe and around the world to deliver those sovereign capabilities that are essential to delivering strategic agency by leveraging cutting-edge technology to actually give democracies the tools that we need to defend ourselves, but more importantly, to the tools through which we can take our future in our own hands. And we can control that technology, we can deploy that technology. We organize that around a philosophy that we call autonomous mass, which is at the heart of software-defined defense that you mentioned. And basic story of that is you put all the complexity onto software in order that you can mass produce hardware. And through this change in weapons design philosophy, we can actually return to scale of the kind that we've seen is essential for winning contemporary peer-to-peer high-intensity conflicts. We've been through a period in Europe in the last 25 years where our defense industries and our defense ministries prioritized low unit numbers of high unit margin exquisite systems, which memorably described as ever more expensive new versions of old things, but which were never designed to scale. We've understood that you have to be able to scale, and that's also the way to leverage what is one of Europe's key competitive advantages, which is our industrial capacity. Not many people know that Europe has more industrial capacity than the United States. but we don't use it at the moment actually for our strategic advantage. So by changing weapons design philosophy, you can start to unlock what I would call freedom's new forge, the European arsenal of democracy, by combining those two strengths of innovation and industrial capacity. And we've been happy to have the chance to pioneer that. We've been very successful, as you may have heard, at raising funds, but that's not just for the sake of it. That's to be able to invest in the talent and the compute that allow you to actually scale at speed at the cutting edge. One example of that, the AI fighter pilot that we created, which flew a real Saab Gripen over the Baltic Sea in the Beyond Visual Range combat simulation last year. It's the first time that's been done in Beyond Visual Range. 2 European companies, Saab and Hellenic, working together to create a real moonshot moment for defense. That was an idea on the 1st of September 2024. It was in the sky, in the steel, on May the 28th, 2025. That's the speed that you get when you invest. And we've been able to have a couple of other manifestations of that, such as through the mass AI-enabled strike drones that we supply to Ukraine, which I'm happy to say are giving the Russians hell, and ultimate feedback comes from that environment. We are all, I'm sure on this panel, learning as fast as we can from Ukraine, but also, as was mentioned on the panel this morning, the first one with Fabrice and co, innovation is not only about technology, it's about aligning your technology with your doctrine, your operational concept, culture, and force structures to genuinely deliver advantage. And this is where we think it becomes a collaborative endeavor, what embodies our philosophy of mission partnership, as we would call it. So we work not only technicians closely with tacticians on the front line, but also my job at Hellenic is to work with militaries around Europe to accelerate that evolution of doctrine to get the best out of new technology and really deliver advantage. And if I just add one more thing, I think what Dimitrios mentioned was extremely important in understanding the challenges that we face in what we call sensor and data fusion, which for years was the long tentpole of the revolution in military affairs. What stopped us actually realizing the potential of network-centric warfare, but it's the combination of hardware and software that changes that, because by putting the AI on the edge, on the platforms, by distributing it around the sensors and the shooters, you can already do the processing before it gets back to HQ. So you only send back the data through the network that you need. You don't break the network, and it makes it easier to get that situational picture. Now, it's incumbent upon us to seize that advantage, because one of democracy's advantage structurally against authoritarians is our ability to have delegated decision-making, which is something that is not allowed for in the untrusting systems of authoritarians. So we have to be playing to our strengths: delegated decision-making, industrial capacity, and innovation.
You know, I've always believed that great companies have always a philosophical foundation. And, you know, Ben's title is the manager for thought leadership at Hellenic. And I'm going to go to one thought leader to another one. I'm going to go to Yanis. You know, Yanis' formal title is Foresight Secretary in the Prime Minister's office. But he was actually the first person to ever write about AI in Greek. Yeah, I know I'm biased because he was my first boss when I was still a kid, but... So, Yanni, how conflict will look like in 5 years? I'm not saying 10 years, because you won't respond, but let's say 5 years, or the futures of conflict, as you like to say.
The future of the world, I guess you mean, Vasilis, by saying that, probably. And I will switch to Greek because, as the minister did, please wear your earphones. Thank you. Κοιτάξτε, αυτό το οποίο ο Βασίλης σας ανέφερε εισαγωγικά, αφού τον ευχαριστήσω για την πολύ ευγενική του πρόσκληση και τον συγχαρώ αυτόν και την εξαιρετική του ομάδα για την πρωτοβουλία και για την άρτια διοργάνωση αυτού του φόρουμ που νομίζω ότι έλειπε πραγματικά από τη χώρα. Μπράβο Βασίλη και μπράβο στα παιδιά. Έχω την εντύπωση ότι το foresight το οποίο ανέφερες εισαγωγικά ότι είναι αυτό το οποίο εγώ και η ομάδα μου κάνουμε στο γραφείο του Πρωθυπουργού, είναι κάτι που με το χώρο της άμυνας, defense και innovation συνδέεται πολύ οργανικά, πολύ δομικά και εκτιμώ ότι συνδέεται και πάρα πολύ παραγωγικά. Ξέρετε, ένας από τους πρώτους άγουρους, κάπως ανώριμους ορισμούς για το τι είναι το foresight δόθηκε το 2003 από τον τότε Υπουργό Άμυνας των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών, τον Donald Rumsfeld, όταν ήθελε να δικαιολογήσει και να εξηγήσει την δεύτερη εισβολή στο Ιράκ. Τότε ανέφερε κάποια λόγια τα οποία παραμένουν μέχρι σήμερα επίκαιρα και μίλησε για τα known knowns, μίλησε για τα known unknowns, για τα unknown knowns και για τα περίφημα unknown unknowns. Το πρόβλημα τώρα είναι το εξής. Αυτό που είπε στο τέλος για τα άγνωστα μεταξύ αγνώστων, σε πολύ μεγάλο βαθμό σημαίνει και λίγο επιστημονική φαντασία. Και το ζήτημα τώρα γίνεται πάρα πολύ ωραίο, γιατί το science fiction πλέον γίνεται science fact. Άρα, οτιδήποτε βιώνουμε σε επίπεδο τεχνολογίας AI, που θεωρούσαμε ότι πριν από κάποια χρόνια ήταν τελείως εκτός πραγματικότητας, πλέον γίνεται απτή πραγματικότητα. Και επειδή ανέφερες για 10-15 χρόνια μετά, αυτό που εμείς κάνουμε και που είναι και η επιστήμη του foresight, προφανώς δεν είναι να προβλέπουμε το μέλλον. Το μέλλον κανείς δεν μπορεί να το προβλέψει. Υπάρχουν κάποιοι οι οποίοι θεωρούν ότι μπορούν να προβλέψουν το μέλλον, βγάζουν και αρκετά λεφτά νομίζω από αυτό, καλά κάνουν. Αλλά η δικιά μας δουλειά είναι επιστημονική. Αυτό που εμείς μπορούμε να κάνουμε είναι να προετοιμαζόμαστε για το μέλλον με πάρα πολλά γοητευτικά, εναλλακτικά what-if σενάρια. Αυτό είναι που χρειάζεται ο κόσμος σήμερα, αυτό είναι που χρειάζεται το defense, αυτό είναι που χρειάζεται η καινοτομία, αυτό πιστεύω πολύ βαθιά ακράδαντα ότι χρειάζεται και η πολιτική και η παραγωγή δημόσιας πολιτικής. Ζούμε σε έναν κόσμο που πριν από 5 χρόνια τον λέγαμε VUCA. Volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. Ξεχάστε το αυτό. Πάει αυτό. Τώρα ζούμε σε έναν κόσμο που το λένε πλέον, όπως διάβασα και το βρήκα πολύ ωραία τώρα τελευταία, NAVI, which is non-linear, accelerated, volatile and interconnected. Αυτός λοιπόν ο NAVI κόσμος θέλει ένα τελείως διαφορετικό mindset αντίληψης των πραγμάτων. Αυτό κατά την άποψή μου είναι το foresight mindset, ένας άλλος τρόπος σκέψης και ανάγνωσης του μέλλοντος, που δεν έχει πρόβλεψη, αλλά έχει πολλά εναλλακτικά what-if σενάρια για διαφορετικά μέλλοντα. Γιατί και πάλι το μέλλον δεν είναι ένα, είναι πολλά και διαφορετικά. Και επειδή είπες ότι ήμουν από τους πρώτους συνεργάτες, οφείλω να σου ξαναδώσω συγχαρητήρια, γιατί με ξεπέρασες κατά πολύ και έφυγες πολύ πιο μπροστά. Και αυτό ήταν ένα foresight που είχα κάνει μαζί σου πριν από 15 χρόνια.
So I'm very tempted to discuss, how science fiction impacts reality. In any case, Palantir and Anduril are names deriving from the Lord of the Rings. But I'm going to go to some hard facts. And what I mean is that, we have here Kiril Petkov. Kiril was Prime Minister of Bulgaria when the war in Ukraine broke out. And actually, maybe Ukraine owes a lot to Kiril's decisiveness, because Bulgaria provided ammunition to Ukraine the first 45 days, and this was something that costed politically to Kiril, because you know that traditionally Bulgaria is very much Russia dependent. So what are the lessons from Ukraine? And how, if you can explain us this decision, why you did that, what was the impact, and what was, the lesson of this whole policy?
So first of all, I want to also further thank you for the invitation. I'm very impressed. We were just met a few weeks ago at Delphi, and today we're here. It's reality. We meet great people, by the way. And for the whole team that organized, including you and the team here, job well done. Now, the lessons. First thing I would say is that no matter what kind of tools we may have the most sophisticated AI tools, weapons of the future. The first thing that starts is with a political decision. And of course, the more tools you have, the easier to make the decision. I fully agree. But at some point in time, you have to say, are we willing to step forward or are we not? And I would never forget the day when the war started. And I saw Mr. Zelensky, and his eyes were dilated. It was the first few strikes in Kiev. And he spoke in front of the European Council, all the prime ministers and presidents of Europe. And we all thought he's going to be dead. He's going to be dead in a few days. And first of all, I want to congratulate my Ukrainian friends here who are also part of the guest list, that they said, no, we won't be dead. We'll keep on fighting. So the first brave decision was on their side. And I thought, sitting as a prime minister, I said, if these guys are willing to fight on the front line, we have to support them with everything we can. So the next thing we did is Bulgaria supplied 5 billion worth of munitions in the first few months, which represented 45% of the munitions in Ukraine. And the second part that we're very proud of is we actually proposed the freezing of the Russian assets in the Eurobonds. It was called the Sofia proposal. Nobody knows too much about it because we're not advertising. I was in a strange coalition that we couldn't talk about it much. But so my first point here is not tolerating dictators to attack democracies is the very first point before we even talk about technology. Second is to take the risk, because there are risks associated with type of moves. Third thing is actual availability of resources at that very moment. We all live in a projected world going forward, and that's how innovation is put forward. But at this point in time, Bulgaria had 5 billion worth of ammunition for Afghanistan, and we were the only ones that had it. So we redirected it. So at any point of development, we should always count on what do we have today. Because in the end of the day, when the moment strikes, that's the only thing you can count on. So this is my second thought process. And the third one is I was in Kiev 3 weeks ago, or 4 now, and I was very impressed how fast the technology is moving forward. And I won't steal the cool phrase of my friend here, which I liked, which I'll leave you to say it, but it's about also asymmetry of resources. In other words, if you want to play the long game, it's not only about managing your current weapon systems, your current human capital, but it's also about how do you make sure that you can drain the resources of the other side before they drain yours. So these are the more fundamental basic challenges that I think, regardless of how advanced we become in the technology sector, it always comes down to political leadership, it comes down about current availability and relative draining of human capital, weapons, and economic resources in order to say which way the direction a war would go.
Thanks, Kiril. Now let's move to Anduril, our favorite sword. So Anduril was founded on the assumption that the traditional defense industrial model was a bit too slow for the pace of modern warfare. And my question is, based on what you experienced in Ukraine and also to other recent conflicts, do you think that this diagnosis was validated?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and first of all, thank you for putting on this event. I think Ukraine's been a fascinating case study, and I'm sure you could do multiple panels on that. I think one of the points that Fabrice spoke about earlier of defense versus deterrence is a key one, but I do believe that the principle of being able to mass produce software-defined hardware systems at relatively low cost is a critical component for both. In terms of Anduril's approach, I think what we've sought to do as well is reframe how governments seek to procure. And so we've spoken about those traditional platforms. You know, the beauty of software is that you can integrate with them, and I think Ben's example of doing that with Saab is unbelievable in terms of the pace. But I think shifting to whether it's trials and evaluation contracts as opposed to these long procurement lead times for exquisite platforms that are manned by many, many highly trained people is extremely important. And so, although a faraway example, what Anduril has done in Australia is establish an entity with their Navy, get on a trial and evaluation contract for a autonomous submarine. And so that took a lot of risk and investment from the Australian government to make that commitment. But through bringing them on that journey, we're now on a program with them. And so that is really a capability gap where they pivoted away from the French option and have gone with this AUKUS option. But clearly those systems are not going to enter service until well into the 2030s. And so if you have this mass available in the subsurface domain, that really augments your capability. And then in terms of the relatively cheap mass, it's also thinking about how that fits with current European militaries. So I'm formerly served in the British military. I think our troop numbers are the lowest in nearly 200 years since the Napoleonic times. And so going back to the Ukraine example, I think it takes, the figures I've heard, between 65 and 90 days to train an FPV pilot to go from 0 to hero. There are not enough soldiers in the British Army, whatever flavour your regiment, to have that mass of highly skilled pilots, because there are just simply too many other tasks that you need to do. So how do we address that? It's really through mission autonomy. So a single platform can have vehicle autonomy, and you can command it to do many, many things on its own. But if you think about, and stealing Ben's example, if you have a software piloted platform, how is a squadron of those systems behaving in formation when it is incurring effects from the other side? And so to allow software to really leverage its advantage, you need a human to control many, many different things. So I think those are some of the themes and learnings from Ukraine, and really comes back to the foundation principles of Anduril, which we clearly share with other technology companies. But it's just really manifesting it in your fighting force today, because we're in that deterrence stage, as mentioned earlier. But if we go to post-Article 5 and there is war fighting at scale in Europe, it is only at that point where we would have a comparable mass of humans to the mobilization that is taking place in Ukraine right now.
Thanks, Robert. Brando Benifei. Brando is in Strasbourg. I have to apologize to Brando because I think I pressed him too much to be with us. He's voting actually in Strasbourg, but thanks, man, for being with us. And the reason is because Brando was the rapporteur of the EU AI Act. So my question to Brando, who's on a rush, is, EU is talking a lot about digital sovereignty. But do you think that, given the fact that most of the assets that are shaping the AI era, compute, platforms, capital, are concentrated elsewhere, can actually Europe do it without rethinking a bit its relationship with risk, regulation?
So, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm sorry I was blocked until now for voting here in Strasbourg plenary. Thanks for this occasion, and congratulations for this very timely summit on such a crucial topic. Well, I can say that in my perspective, obviously we are discussing about simplifying regulations to make it easier for investments. We can discuss about this at length, but the problem, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many colleagues, is that the issue is mainly political, which is something that deals with the lack of political will by the Union to actually act in a coordinated way and not in a fragmented fashion, to actually build technological sovereignty. This cannot be done in one day. I mean, it takes time, and we cannot follow like the idea that we can abandon dependencies suddenly. We can't. But as you know, the EU is preparing in these days, in fact, a tech sovereignty package that is actually going to be part of this effort, because it will deal with the chips, it will deal with cloud, it will deal with accelerating the increase of computational capabilities that the EU has been building with the AI factories. So I want to be pragmatic. I mean, in this parliament, I'm also now the chair of the delegation for relations with the United States. So I work a lot with the United States. Next week, I will be in Texas to discuss technological cooperation. We need to be, again, very realistic. There are dependencies that will not change in one day, but there is a clear political interest by our constituents, by Europeans. The polls are very clear. They want Europe to build more of its own tech sovereignty. We need to go in that way, but we need to do that obviously with realism, which means that we do not need, I give you one example to conclude, we do not need to choose for made in Europe technologies when it's not needed for specific reasons. So the kind of reservation for public procurement for European owned and I would say jurisdictionally protected technologies from a European point of view must be selected in terms of where we really need it. Obviously, when we talk, and you know you're talking about this defense and security, it's the core topic of today, there must be some degree of jurisdictional autonomy for Europe. In fact, I was, and I conclude really on this point, I was surprised to see that this term of autonomy in terms of jurisdiction has been becoming more and more frequent in the conferences, in the technology fairs where I'm usually participating and invited to, because it's something that is felt, and it's not because of a sudden dream in the minds of Europeans. To be frank, it's also linked to the political situation. The tensions that we work to overcome between the two sides of the Atlantic have also influenced the way the Europeans are thinking. And in many member states, this has managed to change, in fact, some perceptions on how we feel safe in terms of ownership of our own technologies.
Thanks, Brando. So let's get back to the minister. You know, I guess we all agree that AI accelerates in a speedier way than institutions can adapt. So my question is, and that's a great issue, can democratic governments follow the pace of AI without losing legitimacy or public trust?
First of all, I'd like also to
of course.
Wear your headphones. Είναι θέμα το οποίο το θεωρώ κορυφαίο για την ποιότητα της δημοκρατίας μας στα χρόνια της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης. Γιατί το ένα κομμάτι, όπως υπόθηκε νωρίτερα, έχει να κάνει με υποδομές, με όπλα, με την εκπαίδευση των ανθρώπων που χρησιμοποιούν αυτές τις τεχνολογίες, με το sovereignty, με την κυριαρχία τέλος πάντων των υποδομών αυτών. Το δεύτερο κομμάτι όμως είναι πλέον το πώς οι δημοκρατίες μας διαμορφώνονται σε μια εποχή που η τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, όντας η κινητήριος δύναμη των social media και όλης αυτής της ηλεκτρονικής δημοκρατίας, πλέον γιγαντώνονται. Γιατί αυτό το οποίο βλέπουμε γύρω μας, και είναι κάτι το οποίο και ο Έλληνας Πρωθυπουργός έχει αναδείξει αυτά τα χρόνια, έχει να κάνει με την ποιότητα της δημοκρατίας σε μια τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, της οποίας η προέλευση δεν ξέρεις πάντοτε από πού είναι, τα δεδομένα με τα οποία τροφοδοτούνται προφανώς δεν γνωρίζεις πού πάνε, ποιος τα βλέπει, πώς τα ελέγχονται, και το τεράστιο ζήτημα που κρύβεται πίσω από όλη αυτή την ιστορία των bots. Έχουμε δει στην Ευρώπη ποια ήταν τα ζητήματα που προκύψανε, τόσο μεγάλα και τόσο έντονα που ανέτρεψαν εκλογικά αποτελέσματα. Συνεπώς, εδώ χρειάζεται μία κοινή ευρωπαϊκή ή και παγκόσμια, βάζοντας μέσα τις δυνάμεις της λογικής εκστρατεία, για να μπορέσουμε πλέον να διαφυλάξουμε το επίπεδο της δημοκρατίας, το κομμάτι της ανωνυμοποίησης, των ανώνυμων μάλλον accounts και όλων αυτών των bots είναι ένα τεράστιο ζήτημα που έχει να κάνει με την άμυνα, γιατί ξέρετε, άμυνα δεν παίζουμε μόνο με τα όπλα. Άμυνα παίζουμε και με το κατά πόσο τελικά η δημοκρατία μας πατάει σε αγερές βάσεις, πώς οι πολίτες αντιλαμβάνονται τη δημοκρατία ή πώς επηρεάζονται από μια δημοκρατία η οποία είναι ευμετάβλητη λόγω όλων αυτών τα οποία παρουσιάζονται, τα deep fake news, η δύναμη ενός ψευδούς βίντεο 2 μέρες πριν τις εκλογές, με έναν πολιτικό να λέει ή να κάνει κάτι, είναι πολύ πιο ισχυρή από οποιονδήποτε πύραυλο, το πιστεύω. Συνεπώς, θέλει δουλειά και σε αυτό το επίπεδο, για το πώς θα μπορέσουμε πλέον να δουλέψουμε, να συνεργαστούμε και να προκύψουν από τις πλατφόρμες accounts τα οποία είναι επώνυμα, πες ό,τι θες, η δημοκρατία τα αντέχει αυτά. Αυτά τα οποία δεν αντέχει είναι όλοι αυτοί πλέον τα στρατευμένα bots, πίσω από τα οποία πλέον κρύβονται τρίτες δυνάμεις, οι οποίες θέλουν να πετύχουν τους σκοπούς τους και τελικά ίσως τους πετύχουν πιο εύκολα, πιο οικονομικά, πιο γρήγορα, πιο αποτελεσματικά με τέτοιου είδους προσεγγίσεις τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, προφανώς, από ότι με τους κλασικούς συμβατικούς τρόπους. Άρα θέλει δουλειά εδώ πέρα. Ένα κομμάτι το οποίο η ελληνική κυβέρνηση ανέδειξε ήδη και ευτυχώς βρήκαμε συμπαραστάτες στην Ευρώπη έχει να κάνει με την προστασία των ανηλίκων. Ούτως ή άλλως οι ανήλικοι σήμερα είναι οι αυριανοί πολίτες, αλλά το άλλο κομμάτι το οποίο πρέπει να ανοίξουμε έχει να κάνει με το γιατί ανεβαίνουν deepfake βίντεο σήμερα στα social media, προφανώς κατασκευασμένα με AI, αλλά και τι γίνεται με όλο αυτό το στρατό εντός εισαγωγικών των bots τα οποία έρχονται να μας κατακυριεύσουν με πλέον έναν πλάγιο αλλά εξίσου ύποπτο τρόπο.
Thank you, Dimitri. Yanni, human in the loop. Is human judgment still indispensable? Or will it be in the next decade?
Θα πρέπει να παραμείνει πάντα ο άνθρωπος στο επίκεντρο. Αυτό το πιστεύω και νομίζω ότι το πιστεύει και η τεχνολογία και η υψηλή τεχνολογία. Και νομίζω το πιστεύουν και όσοι υπηρετούν την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη στο ανώτατο επίπεδο της τεχνολογίας και της ρύθμισης. Υπάρχει μια πολύ μεγάλη παγίδα στην εξέλιξη της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, η οποία έχει να κάνει και με την άμυνα, έχει να κάνει και με το defense, αλλά θέλω να μείνω στη μεγάλη εικόνα της σχέσης του ανθρώπου με την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη. Αυτό είναι κάτι που με ενδιαφέρει πάρα πολύ και εμένα προσωπικά, πέρα από τα διάφορα κυβερνητικά καθήκοντα. Πρέπει να αποφύγουμε δύο μεγάλες παγίδες στην εξέλιξη της υψηλής τεχνολογίας της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης και της σχέσης με τον άνθρωπο. Η πρώτη παγίδα είναι ο ανθρωπομορφισμός, κάτι το οποίο το βλέπουμε και σε επίπεδο άμυνας και σε επίπεδο πολεμικών επιχειρήσεων με ανθρωποειδή. Είμαι, ως Γιάννης μιλάω τώρα, αναφανδόν κατά της χρήσης ανθρωποειδών πάσης φύσεως στη σχέση μας με τεχνολογία, όχι κατά το ρομπότ, με παρεξηγήστε, κατά της ανθρωπόμορφης απεικόνησης της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης. Έχω τη βαθιά πεποίθηση ότι αυτό μας οδηγεί σε παράξενες, περίεργες και επικίνδυνες ατραπούς και μονοπάτια, γιατί ο άνθρωπος τείνει να πιστεύει ότι συνδιαλέγεται με κάτι που είναι όπως ο ίδιος. Αυτό είναι μια μεγάλη παγίδα για τον άνθρωπο, είναι μια μεγάλη παγίδα για τη σχέση του ανθρώπου με τεχνολογία. Η δεύτερη, με συγχωρείτε, πολύ μεγάλη παγίδα που θεωρώ ότι πρέπει να αποφύγουμε πάση θυσία και έχει να κάνει με το human in the loop που ρώτησες, Βασίλη, είναι η πνευματική μας αποδυνάμωση. Να εναποθέσουμε τα πάντα στον αλγόριθμο, να λαμβάνουμε οτιδήποτε εκείνος μας δίνει ουσιαστικά ως μια λευκή επιταγή και πλήρως αποδεχόμενη το αποτέλεσμα, και γι' αυτό και θεωρώ ότι η χρήση κυρίως από νέους ανθρώπους αλλά και από μεγαλύτερους σε αυτή τη φάση των LLMs, όταν φτάσουμε στην επόμενη πίστα της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης που θα είναι τα robotics, εκεί μιλάμε για κάτι τελείως διαφορετικό, πρέπει να είναι αρκετά τεκμηριωμένη ως προς το τι περιμένουμε να πάρουμε ως απάντηση. Με αυτά τα δύο ως βασικές, δεν θέλω να πω κινδυνολογικές, αλλά ίσως υπαρξιακές και υπαρκτές παρουσιάσεις πιθανών κινδύνων, εκτιμώ ότι η τεχνολογία από εδώ και πέρα έχει πολλά να μας δώσει. Δεν χρειάζεται φόβο, χρειάζεται ενημέρωση, χρειάζεται επίγνωση της δυνατότητας που έχει να προσφέρει στην ανθρωπότητα. Και να μην ξεχνάμε ότι μόλις πριν από 2 χρόνια ο Ντέμις Χασάμπης κατέκτησε το Νόμπελ Χημείας, γιατί προσέφερε στην ανθρωπότητα την εξήγηση εξέλιξης της αλληλουχίας δημιουργίας των ανθρώπινων πρωτεϊνών. Προσέξτε, μία ανακάλυψη, το AlphaFold, που βγήκε μόλις 3-4 χρόνια πριν, που σημαίνει ότι αυτό για την ιστορία των Νόμπελ είναι τελείως καινοφανές. Για να πάρεις ένα βραβείο πρέπει να έχουν περάσει κάποιες δεκαετίες ώστε να έχει περπατήσει η τεχνολογία και η ανακάλυψη. Όμως, μέσα σε λίγο χρονικό διάστημα φτάσαμε σε αυτό το σημείο εξέλιξης. Το human in the loop, λοιπόν, και κλείνω με αυτό, έχει να κάνει με το γεγονός ότι δεν χρειαζόμαστε υποκατάσταση του ανθρώπου, χρειαζόμαστε υποβοήθεια του ανθρώπου. Γι' αυτό και, Βασίλη, εγώ συνηθίζω να λέω, και το ξέρεις και εσύ που έχουμε βρεθεί σε άλλα πάνελ, ότι δεν χρειάζεται να μιλάμε τόσο για AI. Γιατί δεν υπάρχει, κατά την άποψή μου, αυτό που λέμε artificial intelligence. Χρειάζεται περισσότερο να μιλάμε για το ανάποδο, για IA, για intelligent assistance.
Ευχαριστούμε, Γιάννη. So, Dimitri, Palantir stands with Israel. This was an ad Palantir had with the New York Times when the war in Gaza broke out. Palantir believes that Western companies have to be on a mission to protect our democracy, to protect the Western world. And my question is, which is, in my opinion, the fundamental question of the summit is, what are we actually defending? Why we do everything?
That's a great question. I think our leadership has taken a very strong stance in this type of issues, and our CEO particularly has a very strong feelings and very strong ways of expressing his feelings around these things, right? And I think he's made it clear that at the end of the day is how do you protect your democracy? How do you put the Western civilization in charge of the most powerful technology out there in a similar way we did with arms race in the past that actually put us to where we are today? How do we make sure that the Western civilization still remains in charge of this technology, keeps developing the technology, has control over this technology, and uses it to maintain superiority over other areas of the world that might not really want to do that. And, you know, given your specific question right now, the elephant in the room is like, you know, the Western countries are not the only ones focusing on AI or developing AI today. Make no mistake, we're not the only ones, right? Russia is doing it, China is doing it, and China's going hard at it. And if you look at China, and if you go and look at the PhD forums, look at the actual raw science coming out of it, they have a lot of talent in there. They don't lack any talent, they don't lack any motivation, they don't lack any people, right? They have a lot of that. Right now, they might be facing some geopolitical challenges in terms of access to hardware, but as it has been seen out there, it hasn't been preventing them from building state-of-the-art language models that can compete with the best coming out of Anthropic or OpenAI to date, right? So they're going after it hard, and the other way you can see it is the moment the war in Iran started, you saw several satellite images from commercial satellite vendors that had a lot of annotated Chinese legends with F-35s, surface vessels, and everything else, right? What does this mean? They've been training those models on satellite imagery for quite some time right now to be able to get an accurate battlespace picture in the case of a war, right? I also think China has an advantage, though, compared to the West, right? And what is that advantage, you might ask? It's a different type of a regime, and a different type of a regime that can actually align things as they see fit, whenever whenever they can, and they feel the need for it, in an immediate way. That's something that the United States government cannot really do, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That might be a good thing. But in the context of this, you know, great powers conflict and everything else, in the context of a new emerging technology, right, we have the West that will try to actually experiment a lot, build a lot, understand the tech, evolve the tech, right? But we do this within specific guidelines. And I think those guidelines are very helpful. China sometimes might not have those safeguards in place, right? And they can go out and align things much, much better. They can collect data much more efficiently than we can, and they can build these things as efficiently as we can. So that can give them a speed advantage, for sure, that we need to be aware of. On the other point of view, though, we need to be very careful here, right? And we should avoid, first of all, I agree with the comment that it's not about AI, it's about IA, right? I definitely agree with that comment that you made beforehand, in the sense that sometimes we talk about artificial intelligence, that something that exists out there that can actually do real intelligence. We're not there. And we need to think through that as we deploy that technology out there. Now, what do I mean by that? I see a lot of people getting scared when they hear the statements, and very rightly so. People that are deep in the tech and they understand the tech are not scared by it because they know the limitations, they know how to apply it. This creates a bit of an issue, though. Like, sometimes governments get scared and they put too many restrictions in terms of how we can actually work towards that. And that's the worst possible thing we can do right now. Again, this doesn't mean that we're going to put AI agents all over the place and we're going to be experimenting in the most dangerous way. But we need to make sure that we start building. And what do I mean by that? Get close to the users. Get out on the battlefield. Work with them. Understand where this tech fails. Understand where this tech can help you. Design those workflows with the users in mind, side by side them, so that they can serve them, so they can save time, so they can remove bottlenecks from their process that they're doing it, right? We have to do it now. Like, this thing, we're not discussing what's going to happen in 10 years from now. That whole evolution has started, The commercial space has a hard time keeping up with it, which is crazy if you think about it, right? And traditionally, the government space and military has been lagging behind that. Now, imagine what will happen if we keep maintaining that pace, right? Like, we need to act, and we need to act now, and we need to be aggressive with it.
Thank you, Dimitri. So obviously, technological transition has tremendous civilizational stakes. I'm sure Helsinki agrees, but I'm not quite confident that Europe fully gets it. Do you think that Europe understands the full stakes?
We've definitely made progress. We're in a much better place now than we were a year ago. We're in a much, much better place than we were 4 years ago. Have we gone far enough and fast enough? Still, no. We could do more, and we could move faster, and I'm sure everyone on the panel would probably agree with that. But give credit where credit is due. I live and work in Germany, as well as across the Helsing Group, and for years, Germany was not known as being at the cutting edge of rapid procurement, to put it mildly. In the last year, that has changed. The contract that was recently awarded for loitering munition systems at scale to Helsing and to one of our competitors was an example of how to do this in a new and different way that shows governments can actually keep pace with technology. This was a contract that led to the procurement of not only systems, but industrial capacity to produce more systems. It understood that this is an iterative capability that will be developed. It was a capability that did not exist on the requirement books of the German Procurement Agency, which is a stunning achievement. Moreover, it was done with competitive testing before buying, so you don't get a PowerPoint competition, you've got a real in-field testing competition to see what works. It also comes with major parliamentary oversight, and as a German taxpayer as well as a Helsing employee, I thoroughly salute this process. We should be, though, moving faster and further. As I said, we face a situation in Europe that I would describe in 3 words: threat, vulnerability, and opportunity. The threat is clear. The threat in the immediate term to us is from Russia to try and force a political fait accompli on us using military means and military overmatch in order to break NATO and to break our way of life. We are vulnerable, despite the fact we're introducing higher defense budgets, because we lack serious capability, and a lot of the capabilities that we are investing in take too long to be delivered. Lithuania, classic example, 5.38% of GDP on defense. Their heavy division will not be ready until the early 2030s. We have to get there first. We also wonder, as was mentioned, changing character of warfare we see in Ukraine. Will those heavy traditional platforms be the ones we need by 2033? Well, that changing character of warfare also offers us the opportunity, if we embrace and lean into it, to get the kind of capability we need to close the vulnerability gap. We recently commissioned an independent war game that was run by a war game center that showed that with the loitering munition systems that we produce, by the end of 2027, for the cost of only a few $100 million, you could get the kind of firepower that it would have taken 24 Apaches, 3,000 Hellfire missiles, 3,000 Spike missiles, and a serious amount of extra HIMARS at a cost of around 16 billion euros to deliver over a period of 10 years. We can give you that by the end of next year at a cost of a couple of $100 million. That is an opportunity if we lean into it. But the key here is actually doing it. So the Nike strategy applies, just do it. And this, I think, relates to a couple of comments, if I may, Basil, I'd just like to pick up on, because I thoroughly agree with what's been said by Rob about leaning into the fact that we've got technologies for the first time that can invert the human-machine ratio in military affairs. You no longer need many humans to maintain and operate one system. You can have one human operating many systems. But as long as we continue to discuss AI in the abstract, we won't solve either the ethical questions that brings, nor the efficiency and military effectiveness questions. This is about practical experimentation. And that, luckily enough, is also the way we develop the ways of fighting with this technology that will give us advantage. So I would make a plea to actually stop debating this, and with a very controlled system, with thorough assurance mechanisms in place of the kind that Helsing has invested in industry-leading standards of, so you can explain the AI, and the AI will explain why it's done what it's done. You have a meaningful level of human judgment, appropriate levels of human control, but you actually work out where are the practical issues that you need to solve. So this is about pushing forward in practice. And the great thing about that, to come back to your initial question, is quoting William James, the psychologist, that you don't do brave things because you have brave feelings. You get the brave feelings when you start doing brave things. And if we want to address the crisis we're in sufficiently, then we need to start doing that. Can I say one last thing? Because Kiril set me up for it before.
Of course.
So I heard a great quote. It's not actually mine the other day, but on this economy of war piece, that we need to win the economic fight here as well. Someone described the current approach to air defense as like throwing Ferraris at Frisbees, which I thought absolutely nailed the problem. And of course, AI can actually help you make better decisions about what you fire at what threat, but you have to have that inventory, you have to have those munitions. As Kiril was saying, you've got to get the stuff in your stocks to be able to fight with it.
Thanks, Ben. Kiril, do you think that Europe is psychologically prepared for this new era of computational mass? I've got it right.
So first of all, I like that phrase, throwing Ferraris at Frisbees. I think that's something to remember from today's forum. So what I think is, for Europe, we had to come up to the understanding, it's a very macro picture even. We are the second biggest GDP in the world. We are actually a rich place to live in, a good lifestyle. Europeans enjoy their life. Yet, in terms of active army, as it was said earlier in the panels, we are, just to read some of the countries behind. So, of China, India, Russia, Ukraine, United States, North Korea, South Korea, Pakistan, Israel, we're about the level of Taiwan. So, this is something very important. We are a rich place, which is unprotected. So we should not be surprised that some people from the other places where they don't have the GDP, but they have the armies, will start looking at this territory and say, okay, maybe it's time to change this. Moreover, it was said very well that Russia and China have an advantage. They're a single entity. So coordination for them is very easy. For us, it's not so easy. I've been in the European Council. Everybody has an idea. Everybody likes to hear their voice. Everybody wants to a little bit pull the rug towards their country, even though we talk about the joint thing. So Europe has to change this perception. We have to be much more coordinated. We have to understand that real numbers matter, regardless of the technology. We cannot be protecting such a large GDP with 150,000 active members, no matter the technology. So this is a kind of a mind shift that has to happen. I think it's happening. Now on the technology side though, I really enjoy the fact that the technology delivers much more results than casualties. I mean, we see it in Ukraine today. The ratio is 1 to 8, roughly, in terms of casualties. So there we should think why this happened. We all talk about amazing drone technologies, they appeared, but why did this drone technology actually appeared? For 2 reasons. At Harvard, I had a professor who used to tell me, you never innovate with a tequila or a margarita on the beach. You always innovate when you have a fork next to your neck. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, they did something very smart, and we should think about that in a European context as well. They actually gave the procurement choices on the frontline commanders, which have to risk their life every day. So what I was surprised when I went there, I thought that the competition is between Russia and Ukraine. It actually turns out the competition is mostly among the Ukrainian companies supplying the front line. So they've created a competitive cluster that can actually deliver results of innovation more than the enemy lines, which means that the ratio has grown from 1 to 3 casualties to 1 to 8 today. So having all this together, I think that European policymakers have to realize that we have to be depending on our own strength. And Trump helped us with this thought process. We cannot rely on somebody else. We have to understand that with this high GDP per capita, we need to protect. We have to understand that competitiveness and innovation comes from good coordination, but also coming up with smart economic models to foster this innovation. And if we're able to put all this off together, and actually I'm a big proponent of getting Ukraine into the EU, because this actually gives us already a strong military size with all the experience they have as a EU. I think we have not a bad future going forward. And unfortunately, for Ukraine, they had to pay with their lives for us to learn these lessons. But now that we have learned these lessons, we have to apply them.
Thanks, Kiril. So a concluding question for Robert. what it takes for the free world to win this race over authoritarianism?
Yeah, it's quite a question. You could probably write a thesis on that. Excuse me. I think it's a continuation of so many of the themes that have been described in the last hour and through this day. But I think it really comes down to military transformation now, and to, it's moving out of that abstract, and how do we leverage autonomy and software and this really sophisticated technology to enhance human operators? And so, what does that look like? To use a slightly silly example, I was visiting a eastern flank border post where you would have a human observing live camera feeds on multiple hour shifts at a time, and there is no technology that can distinguish between excuse me, wildlife and humans. And it's actually removing that decision making from the human level, and that can be done with software. And so you have to then bring, what is the decision being made, what is the level, and what is the context? And actually learning as you are developing those technologies and being comfortable with that software is critical. And to kind of bring it to a different example, where the US Air Force has a loyal wingman program, so you have your unmanned systems alongside your 5th and 6th generation fighters, and Europe will have these programs very shortly. But the US Air Force and the Dutch have just joined that program as well, is that you're not only learning those mission autonomy behaviors, but you're actually subsequently informing your future force design, in 5 to 10 years, and how you're going to leverage air power for both North American, but also in a NATO context as well. And so I think to really win as a democratic group of countries that are like-minded against those strategic adversaries we have, is actually accelerating the development of the technology in an ethical way, but bringing it into the hands of humans as soon as possible. And I think a big part of that is how the government and industry work together and really reform how defense has been procuring and buying for decades gone past, and really come into the software age.
Thank you, Robert. So we're running out of time, but because our world is a world of relationships, and it's important to honor our relationships, I want to thank my co-founder and wonderful partner, Nikos Karamanlis, who is leaving the hall. He's trying to escape. Thank you, Nico. He's been a terrific co-founder. He's been a terrific partner, a very visionary guy. We need to thank some of the people whom we first talked about the summit. The first one was Greg Mills. Greg, thank you for being here, for flying from South Africa, or I don't know. The second being Nick Carter. Nick is not here, but I think he's on his way. Also, all my friends from Saudi Arabia to Ukraine, and from Zambia to Bulgaria. Dimitris, who flew in from Seattle, and he's leaving tomorrow, so thank you all so much. And of course, the guy who essentially ran this whole summit, Themis, who is, sometimes he's driving me crazy, but I could have never asked for a better chief of staff. The guy is going places. So thank you all.